Why do podcasts continuously keep breaking up? There's a consistent theme, whether it be Mandy B and Bridget Kelly, Joe Budden, Rory and Mal, the girls from Call Her Daddy. There's a consistent theme of big podcasts and even small podcasts breaking up. They were friends that would usually have a common third place. And this is the podcast trap before it gets messy. And they're like Joe Budden, Rory, you are fired. I have a great conversation with my friend, with my boy, my girl. We should start a podcast talking about X, Y, and Z, right? But that's not what you're doing. What you're actually saying to your partner, to your business partner, is this podcast is brought to you by Wit Media Studios. So why do podcasts continuously keep breaking up? Today on the show, we are talking about podcast breakups. Welcome back to Hustle Over Everything. This is the show at the intersection of business and culture. I'm your host, Alex, and today we're talking podcast breakups. If you don't know my resume already, I've been in the podcast for 5 years. Last year we had 1.2 million downloads across YouTube and on our audio platforms. And we have our own studio here with Media Studios. So one thing you might have seen across the internet is no matter rich, poor, black, white, of big podcasts and even small podcasts breaking up. So the question is, why? What's going on? And I want to dive into this today because I have, as the OGs know, a lot of experience here. So I think I could shed light onto what goes on. So if any podcasters listening, thinking about starting their own podcast, joining it with somebody else, and they're thinking, what should I know to have a good podcast with my business partner? Here's what you should know. Okay, the very first thing as we jump into this is that the biggest misconception of starting a podcast is the initial conversation. Now let's talk about this because a lot of times when we start a podcast, we usually see somebody else that has a podcast and we're like, yo, I have a great conversation with my friend, with my boy, my girl. We should start a podcast talking about X, Y, and Z, right? But that's not what you're doing. What you're actually saying to your partner, to your business partner, is let's start a media company together. Please understand that. You are not saying, let's just sit down and have a conversation. You are saying, let's start a media company together. So with that difference comes a lot of different things that needs to be accountable for. So in this episode, we're going to get into the many different things that cause the podcast breakups. I'm talking about creative differences, money, ego, commitment issues, and more. All right, so the top number one reason podcast breakup, of course, is money. Now, here's the thing too, and this is a prime example of what happened with an athlete. They broke up not because they didn't have money, but because they didn't properly set out the roles for when the money comes. Because what happens is you get to starting with your people and they're like, yo, bro, I have this podcast, come join on. Bro, I have this podcast, come join on. They come, they have their opinions, y'all get along amazingly on the mic, and next thing you know, a deal comes. Who is in charge of the business? Who is the owner of the business? Roles and responsibilities were never divvied out, and that causes a lot of pain and anguish because everybody is invested in the podcast, but nobody has proper roles and responsibilities of what's actually going on. So I'll give you an example. They start a podcast and they just start rolling. No contracts are signed because that's my boy, that's my girl. And before you know it, one person is a mic. A mic makes a big difference. If you don't know what A mics are the person that is perceived as controlling the podcast. And B mics are the people that are perceived as being secondary on the podcast. And if you don't have those etched out within your podcast, people will have confusion within your podcast. But most importantly, brands and sponsors will have confusion within that podcast, as well as your own podcast partner can have confusion within that podcast. So it's very important that you know who's A mic and B mic within that podcast. Okay, now let's get back to the money talks. So a brand now comes along and says, hey, we want to give you a year deal for $100,000. How are you splitting that money up? You don't know, do you? And that is a problem. Where's that money going? You don't know, do you? And that is a problem. Listen, if you and your partner are on great terms, first things first, I highly suggest you guys sit down and define clear roles of what is going to happen. An exercise that's great to do is to say, hey, if we were to get $100,000 to invest in this podcast, how would we split it? Who gets what? Where would that money go? Not just in terms of where does it go in the podcast, but how do we split it up according to our roles? Who is in charge of the editing of the podcast? Who is in charge of the posting of the podcast? Who is in charge of all the different roles that comes to booking? There's so much that goes into it. Let's just keep it a buck. There's so much that goes into it. So make sure that's accounted for. Have that in the contract and have that laid out so there's no anonymity when it comes to what your roles are and who gets rewarded for those roles. Now, one thing I want to get into when it comes to having your podcast not fall apart is creative differences. Because here's one thing that people sleep on. What kind of media company are you building? Are you building a boutique media company? Or are you trying to build a massive media company? Are you trying to build Barstool? Or are you trying to build the Joe Budden podcast? What comes with that is a different mindset of what you're aiming towards and the actionable things you're doing between your partner and you. Having a clear understanding of your future will determine your current actions, at least with your partner. And honestly, having a partner is great. It allows you to have someone to bounce ideas off. It allows someone to pick up slack. But when you have a partner, communication is such a slept-on word. And one thing to note is that you don't just have a podcast partner, you have a co-founder. You have somebody that you are legally bound to when it comes to this business. So you need to not love them necessarily, but have respect for them. Because without that respect, that relationship will crumble. And one thing that happens with podcasts is that they start off as friends, get into business partners, and the next thing you know, they're neither. They're not friends, they're not business partners, they just crumbles. And here's the thing, co-founders get their head cut off. If we were to look in the startup world, when it comes to Facebook, that co-founder got his head cut off. When it comes to Uber, that co-founder got his head cut off. If you were to look at multiple startups, a lot of the co-founders got their head cut off. Who founded Tesla? It wasn't Elon Musk. It was two other guys, and they got their heads cut off. So be mindful of the relationship you're building with your partner and the legalese as in the contracts for your partner. This podcast is brought to you by Whip Media Studios. When it comes to recording your own podcast, you need a team. Don't just settle for using one camera. You need a multiple camera setup so you can have the options of cutting and leveraging it to the best of your ability. Now, with Whip Media Studios, you have state-of-the-art Cinema 6K cameras as well as state-of-the-art audio equipment with a sound-treated room. Why not go for the best and compete at a high level? If you're interested in launching your own podcast or doing your own content, you can hit us in the link below at whipmedia.ca, or you can email me directly at alex@whipmedia.ca. All right, let's get into the show. How are you guys splitting up the money? And how are you guys splitting up the roles? So there's this podcast called Salary Transparent Street where they interview different people on the street getting how much money they make. And their podcast and overall media company is booming. And one thing I found so interesting in it is that the people who own it are a couple, a married couple, and the wife in it makes 7 times more than the husband. And people are continuously ragging on them. There's even an episode where she jokingly calls him a bitch. And I was like, whoa, yo, even jokingly, don't joke and call me a bitch. Like, I don't know about all that. I can never. And I'm gonna see if I can find it and put it in right here for you, because I'm still stunned, even if it's a joke.
And I'm still taking home $200,000 a year. So I am not upset. I believe my paycheck every 2 weeks comes out to about $5,000. So I'm making like 10 grand after taxes, after healthcare, all of that take home every month. It's a really solid place to be. So, James, what do you do for a living?
How do I put this lightly?
You're my bitch. I'm kidding.
right, there you go. No, I'm a house husband. Yeah. Cameraman, photographer, I don't know, advisor.
A co-founder for sure.
Yeah, co-founder.
Senior advisor.
Yeah.
To the
I'm like,
CEO.
I'm like, yeah, like the C.
You're my right-hand man.
Yeah, I'm the COO. That's what we'll call it. Yeah, the COO.
Yeah, you are.
Like, there's certain things you don't joke around with personally. But the point I'm making is she makes more money because she does more in that business. She controls the editing. She's the talent. She's in line with, like, she's the CEO of the business, to be frank. So she makes more, and I think he does more of like a videography role that's simply recording on the street, but then he doesn't do the actual editing and things of that nature. So he has a totally different role and makes less money because of that. And that's actually fair. Now, how that impacts their marriage, we don't know about that. But in terms of roles and allocation of that, that's very fair. So I highly suggest you have that mapped out. So when the money does come, it's not any confusion. Because that's what happened with I Am Athlete. That's what happened with Call Her Daddy. So please, please, please be weary of that. Let's move on. Unequal workload and commitment. Oh my days. This is a huge part of running a podcast. Now here's the thing. Two girls have a great conversation and they realize they have an amazing rapport. They're both educated. They both look good on camera. So they start a podcast. And then one girl's like, hey, I'm going to start getting things done. One girl's type A, one girl's type B. And the type A starts getting all the admin work done. The type B person just shows up, records, and leaves. Well, that's two different roles completely. One person is doing the grunt work. One person is doing the planning, the booking, the posting, the team management of editors, finding editors. Listen, can we talk about finding an editor that's in your ballpark of dollars and can also edit quality? Is so hard to find. It's because editors are a dime a dozen. There's a lot of editors out there, but the ones that are both quality and will fit within your budget are increasingly hard to find. I'll never forget, it took me 10 months to find a quality editor. The first video he posted went viral. It was an immediate jump because the quality was right there. And I'll never forget that because it made such a difference to how people perceived the brand and the overall flow with the company. But that process of finding that person took so long. And if one person is dedicating their life to getting these things done while the other person is not doing anything, it's gonna make a huge difference when it comes to who feels, not just who deserves, but who feels like they are owed something for their efforts. And here's the thing, just like with startups, people are putting in sweat equity. They're showing up to pods, and what you don't see, for people that are not podcasters, just watching to get the education of why people break up, is that before and after a lot of these podcasts, people are spending an hour and a half setting up. Then after tearing down, it's another hour and a half. So it's actually, for most podcasters out there, they're not recording in studios like with media studios. They're actually recording in makeshift spaces, in living rooms, in photography studios, in stores, in living rooms of other people. And they're setting up all these cameras that take 2.5 hours, then performing for you, then putting it down, and doing that week after week after week, which definitely gets tiring without getting money for it. So when that money finally comes, it is everyone scraping for it. It's my turn. It's my turn to eat. So please be mindful. And if you find a podcast that's not getting those views that they once got, like, comment and give them some words of encouragement, because trust me, that person is probably feeling it. All right, now back to unequal workload. With that one person taking on more of the workload, it builds resentment. And here's the thing, with these two people, right? It's usually two people, it could be more. They were friends that will usually have a common third place. And this is the podcast trap. There's usually a common third place where those friends meet to have lunch, talk, gallivant, whatever. Once you start doing the podcast becomes that third place. But that third place is now work. So the relationship naturally crumbles because there is no more third place between those two people. They're just showing up to work and leaving. And then they think to themselves, why would I go hang out again? We just had a hangout session. We just recorded a pod, because it feels fun when you're in it. But in actuality, it's not work. So that relationship starts to crumble because it went from a hangout relationship at the third place to a work relationship. So if you don't maintain a third place relationship with that person, that relationship is most likely going to crumble. Unless there is a clear understanding that this is now strictly work. Please be mindful of that. Also, be mindful of whatever somebody's resentment or buildup of resentment is starting to fester. Because if you don't have that mindfulness and empathy for them, it's gonna pop on you. You need to be able to say, hey girl, I noticed you're feeling a little ways. Let's step outside, let's talk. I know what's popping with you? I know you're feeling away. What's going on with you? Having the empathy can make such a difference, but I'll get to suggestions in a minute. All right, next is ego and personality clashes, power struggles. Who is really the A-Mike? Here's the thing, podcasts right now is almost like, so it's a little bit like digging for gold, because it's one of the best jobs ever. The fact that you can show up to the place, sit down, talk, and get paid to just do that is probably one of the most beautiful things on the planet. Where else can you do that, really, outside of being a YouTuber, which is still a podcaster in some sorts, right? It's honestly a blessing, and a lot of these podcasts, they can literally just show up and freestyle, just come off the top of their head. They're not even having strong show notes. The pre-production's quite light. They're just writing things on the board. So in actuality, in terms of labor, it's amazing. Going back to the type A and type B woman, the type A woman is now leading the charge, doing the admin, the booking, the et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And now the type B woman that's not doing anything comes and says, hey, I know you do this, but I don't really like how you're doing that. Type A is like, hey, yo, I'm doing X, Y, and Z. If you don't shut your ass. Because it's like, how are you giving me an opinion when you're not contributing half as much as I am? That is a reality with a lot of podcasts. Trust me, it happens on either side of the paint. So be mindful of that. And I hope people don't think I'm trying to be messy. It's not a messy podcast at all. This is really trying to speak to how you can be mindful and intentional when it comes to maintaining a relationship. Because I don't want you to end your podcast. I want you to have a thriving show that serves an audience and for you to have a thriving community. That's the goal we all want. A lot of us don't even want to be worldwide famous. We just want to have a community of people that rock with us and be able to have like our 1,000 true fans. That's what we really want. Our own little niche on the internet where people can, foster together, have jokes, have a good time, and learn and thrive together. And if this ends for you, I would be really sad because that feeling of putting in the effort for over years and having it just, crack and just fly into the wind, it sucks, And that relationship it's a thing. It's a living, breathing thing. And to have that die, it's like, damn, you have to like mourn it, So if you can leverage anything that's from this episode to maintain that relationship, I hope it works, And a lot of things here don't just apply to podcasts. They also apply to, working with a partner overall. It applies to working in a business with somebody. These are common things that happen. Businesses fail all the time, and it's not just from competition or money running out. It's from co-founder drama. That's how a lot of businesses fail. Not because they couldn't figure out how to make money, because the co-founders were tearing their head off. So I hope this really serves you well. Let's get into the next part. Ooh, this is a good one. Life changes. Somebody's getting married. Somebody's getting a divorce. A lot of times with a podcast, you're so closely wrapped with that person. And you are not only sharing what your opinions are, you're sharing your life stories. You're sharing intimate moments. And that can affect what's happening in real life. You talk about your wife on the podcast and how great your relationship is, and next thing you know, you're getting divorced. And you need to now show up as talent and present. Going back to the type A and type B girl, imagine type A girl is busting her ass, and then type B girl is going through a divorce. Type A is like, hey, yo, I know you're going through a divorce, but we need this podcast. We have $200,000 on the line, buddy. We need to get it together. That's what a lot of type A people can think of when it comes to that's what a lot of type A people can think of in that moment because they're focused on the mission at hand. Now, I implore you, if this happens to you, just take a step back and have empathy because real life can affect your podcast, whether it be the ups and downs of relationships, deaths in the family. Life is life. So you need to have the balance and the mind frame to understand that not every episode is going to be a banger. So another thing too is relocation, career shifts. One person wants to move to a city on the other side of the country. So now they either have to fly in and schedules change or they're getting married in another city and they're moving to be with a man or they're moving to be with their girl. And that person doesn't respect it. They don't even like the partner like that. But you know what? They just got to swallow that and keep it pushing. So those are things to be mindful of when it comes to building with your partner. Next, let's talk about how the fallouts really happen. Because what's sad about it is fallouts happen by death by 1,000 small cuts. There's rarely a big blow up. It usually slowly leads to a big blow up, or money comes and then things start to blow up from all the past resentment that happens. What kind of happens a lot of times are slow fades. People stop responding. The communication starts to wither. A big thing that happens is because of the podcast now being that third place, one of the people in that partnership no longer wants to go to that third place because they don't want to open up and communicate about what's really bothering them. So they rather just go to a pod, keep it recording, and then move on with life. Another one is having upfront mishaps on the pod. Suddenly there's passive aggressive remarks. There's comments that's like, hold up, what'd you just say? You know those moments where you just like, what was that? Come again? When your voice just gets high, like, what did he just say? Those moments are glaring red flags, and don't just brush it off. Especially if you're a guy. A lot of guys, it's like, man, he just playing. He don't mean nothing. Nah, that guy's serious, bro. Watch out. I feel like girls are a little bit better, a little bit more in tune with their emotions. Not to be stereotypic, but it's just facts are facts, and they're better at calling it out and addressing it as it comes. And I implore all the guy partners, because here's the thing, a lot of guys, they ain't gonna say it till it's too late, until it blows up and it's like, what you do? Nah, address it as it comes, bro. Please. Before it gets messy and you're there like Joe Budden, Rory, you are fired. Legendary. Okay, so I've talked about it already, but let's get into some action items. In my corporate voice. Let's get into the action items of this meeting. Once again, set clear roles and responsibilities. Have an understanding of how the money is divvied once you make money. Because let's be real, a lot of the podcasters are not making money yet. You'll get there, but you're not making money yet. A lot of us aren't, we ain't Joe Budden yet. We ain't Call Her Daddy yet. We ain't Earning Leisure yet. We're not Joe Rogan yet, but we'll get there. And when the time does come, how are you going to properly delegate those dollars? Or you get this, he gets this, I get that. That's what's happening. We already had the conversation. No anonymity around it. You can't be mad now. Don't be mad now. All right. Now, another thing is be willing to evolve. Be willing to understand that roles change. You might have been the type A person in the beginning, but now it's delegated, so the roles and responsibilities have changed. You need to be empathetic to where the brand is going. Understand that reinvestment might be necessary. You want to build your own studio out. You want to invest in bringing a big guest on the show. You want to invest in traveling for the show. There's different elements that is worth investing in to bring it to the next level versus taking the money for yourself. Be willing to invest in your craft. It's something you're building for the long haul, I assume. So be willing to invest in it because it will pay off. Having a community that really believes in you pays dividends. Lastly, have an upfront agreement. Have a contract. Have different lawyers look at each contract and do what needs to be done. Do the thing. Do the thing. I like Chris Williamson's podcast, and he has this phrase, do the thing. Don't procrastinate about the thing, that's not doing the thing. Thinking about the thing is not doing the thing. Practicing the thing is doing the thing. Writing down things about how you're going to do the thing is not doing the thing. Go and do the thing. Another factor to consider, have an exit plan. Talk to your partners about, all right, how do we end this podcast? Let's be real. If we were to split, how would you want to do it? How would you want to split properly? Am I a contractor? Am I a partner? Am I a co-founder? What is the partnership agreement? Final thoughts, if you're thinking about starting a podcast, if you're thinking about launching something, feel free to reach out to me. If you don't know my resume already, I've been in the podcast for 5 years. Last year we had 1.2 million downloads across YouTube and on our audio platforms. And we have our own studio here with Media Studios. So feel free to holler or feel free to message me. Encourage your partner to be communicative. I can't stress that enough. Resentment builds and you don't want that to pop on you. I promise you, it's not a good look from an audience perspective and it's from a personal standpoint. This person is usually your friend. They're usually someone that you'd bring around your family. So do what you can to maintain that relationship before it goes sour. All right. I hope you guys really got some value from this. If you like this kind of episode, feel free to comment down below. Show me some love. Tip the barber. Hit subscribe. Hit like. And we could wrap on that. Hustle what you can control. So control your grind and control your life. I'm Alex. Peace.